Okay, good morning. First thing is I'm not a professor. Thank you for the introduction. I'm not at a university. But I am at the Joint Research Centre, which is part of the European Commission. The label Institute for Prospective Technological Studies, by the way, doesn't exist anymore, if anyone is interested. We are just the DG Joint Research Centre, the Commission. I must admit that I do feel under pressure after such a well put together critique of European policy by Professor Amaral, and in fact that this subject in a way aims to address those failures of the past, and also in the plenary, in the parallel session this morning, I think I had one speaker who said, Cassio, who said that the EU is one of the leading players in helping higher education connect to regional development. So I also feel under pressure with that. I think another one said that the EU supporting the controversial regionalisation process in Portugal. Sorry about that. Although I must admit, though, smart specialisation does contribute in some ways to that need for more subnational authority. And one of the third speaker in a parallel session said that the government of Salazar asked for something like this in the 60s. So, I'm feeling a little bit under pressure, so I hope I can in some way deliver something of interest to you. I mean, it is quite good that I come after just a presentation there by Professor Amaral, because in a way this could be a solution. Smart specialisation could be a solution to, I say could, because I'm going to say will to the problems that we've got, because in fact it is trying to align demand and supply much better than in the past. I mean, the argument is that if you do concentrate on a few competitive, priorities in your region, maybe you'll have then jobs for the supply of the higher education, which has been the problem in the past. But look, first of all, I mean, who has heard of smart specialisation? That's the first thing. Put your hands up if you have. Yes. No, I'm asking who's heard of smart specialisation. No, that's what I'm saying. That's what my question is. To know how much to explain about it. I don't want to spend half the presentation talking about what it is if everyone's heard of it. But can I have some water, please? Thanks. Here. Okay. Yeah. Okay, about half of you. Anyway, I mean, it's actually as much a policy approach to regional development as an academic theory. I mean, it has been developed by a few academics. I won't go into it. People like Dominic Frey and Philip McCann who have actually developed this as a theory, but really, when you get down to the dirty work, which is what we do in terms of putting it into practice, it's more of a policy approach than an academic theory. And in fact, I'm from the Joint Research Centre, which is, I guess, our role, if you don't know, is about halfway between research and policy. We try and give evidence-based advice to our bosses in Brussels on their policies. And this is one of those projects of the Joint Research Centre, which is what I'm involved in. It's called the Smart Specialisation Platform. It's actually 5 or 6 years old now, and it was created part of the Europe 2020 process in order to help regions and countries to implement the smart specialisation strategies and make better use of the structural funds to achieve the Europe 2020 goals. It's quite an interesting position that we're in, because although I'm employee of the European Commission, the Joint Research Centre to a certain extent is outside the Commission because we get involved with stakeholders and researchers like today. But we also give advice to the DGs in Brussels, and we can give some confidential advice to them as well. So we have, for example, an inter-service steering team for smart specialisation that we coordinate with DG Research, DG Regio, DG Education, all the relevant DGs. And so we're in the scientific community. We try when we have time to write some papers, but I must say we don't get much time to write many. So why were we created, and why was smart specialisation created really, is because we have been spending now in the European Union a lot of money on research and innovation in the cohesion policy, as well as the framework programmes. So in the previous period, we spent over 80 billion, but there wasn't much. The ex post evaluations weren't very positive, and the impact of that investment, and some of these problems about having a lack of critical mass, sort of a café para todos, as we say in Spain, giving out the money to all the areas of researchers in every subject, was one of the reasons which we considered it wasn't working, as well as these contributions from the academics. So smart specialisation was a result of that. And I said, it's very brief, because I know half of you know what it is, but it's basically the idea is that you look at the evidence of what a region has, so you can do some analysis, but it's not a top-down decision. It's not any government saying these are the priorities. It's something that comes from the entrepreneurial community. So yesterday, for example, we were in Viseu doing an entrepreneurial discovery process workshop with the wine community and the wine value chain, to see what their ideas. They're the ones. The idea is that they're the ones who know the market better than the government. They're the ones who should give the priorities. But in a global perspective, some of these research innovation strategies before have been very much looking at their own region and not understanding what the competitors are doing elsewhere, outside the region, outside the country. So that's the smart part of it. And by the way, you don't have to create all the knowledge in your own region. This is a very important point, going back to the R&D target. I mean, there's no point in having 3% R&D in a region where there's no one to use it. So it's the use of knowledge, not the production of knowledge, which creates the value. So that's the smart. Anyway, there's a specialisation, is that, yes, we've got scarce resources, so we need to prioritise where they're going to be spent. Focus on those areas which have strength, which have potential, and create critical mass. And by the way, they're not sectors. Although we were looking at the wine yesterday, there was lots of ideas about enoturism, health and wine. There was an idea, I think someone said from Oliveira, they came up with something to test water. And now it's actually the wine industry has taken over that technology and is using it, and actually they don't work with water anymore, they work with wine. So we kind of this cross-sectoral approach as well. It's not all, Algarve, for example, they ran a mile when they heard of this. They said, well, we've got far too much tourism, we're too specialised on tourism. We don't want any more specialisation. That's not actually what it's about. It's actually about diversification within strengths. Okay? That's smart. And the strategies, they are actually, it's a bit controversial because you'll have heard them as research and innovation strategies for smart specialisation. They're not research strategies. They shouldn't be research strategies, in my view. And in the regulations, it's just called smart specialisation strategies. We've had a whole debate about this in the last couple of months because the European Commission is having a new communication in terms of the future funding period and whether smart specialisation is going to going to be included again. And we're back to smart specialisation strategies, not research. So there's a lot of politics in Brussels about this. But I agree that they shouldn't be called research because research is one element of innovation. It's not the only element. They're, in fact, regional development strategies more than research strategies. Place-based economic transformation agendas. That's what they are. And, if you don't know, regions must have those, must have one of these strategies in order to spend the structural funds on innovation. It's a condition. That's why everyone's got them. And that's why I said, for example, about the Portuguese regions having more responsibility, because they had to have one. And they had to do things like talking to the entrepreneurs. And who's going to do that? They're not going to do it in Lisbon, although I think they tried a bit and failed. But the regions are actually the best people who can do that with their own local stakeholders. So they did that, and as I said, we're building from previous successes. That's why it's also called RIS3, because there was previous experiments with regional innovation strategies before, but we're breaking, this is what Kevin Morgan says, building on the past, but breaking with it. So, more in tune with the industrial and economic fabric of the regions. Not so much the technological. I must admit, though, the strategies that were submitted to the Commission are still far too technologically orientated in terms of their view of innovation. But okay, we told them not to. That's what we got. But that was the advice. And not just copying from the best regions, although it is interesting to look at the varieties of capitalism, and I would say definitely, and I got the impression from Professor that the German model is better than the English model. But certainly in terms of off-the-shelf strategies, that's not what we should be doing. We should be working what works in Italy, what works in Spain, what works in Portugal. Okay? Anyway, you might ask me, have we got any examples? Well, yes, we have. So you can find them. They're called smart stories. It's all on this S3 platform website, which is getting quite big now. Quite a few from Southern Europe in there, if you're interested at your leisure to read about them. Okay, now I'm going to go on to the issue of higher education itself within smart specialisation. I'll say a few words about that, and then, given that I'm from the European Commission, I'll have to give you some financial data about the funds as well, but I think it's quite interesting, about what money is available to implement this agenda. And then finally, I'll talk about a project that I'm now managing that really started with this conference and has only just come to fruition in the last year or so. I said we did a conference with the European University Association. There was University of Milan and Nort, who were in fact one of the case studies there, who presented. And what is very interesting is that we had the Director General of Research for Education for Regio all together, actually for the first time to talk about this, and they all agreed that it's not only about research or education or regional development, third mission, whatever, it's all together. So integrate those different activities. As you can see there, Robert Jan Smits, who still is the Director General for Research and Innovation, saying that rather than treating them in isolation, knowledge created can have a much greater impact. And the university management, as well as the academic staff, need to be more proactive and move beyond monodisciplinary actions. But also, and this is a structural issue, is the regulations at national level, which I'm not going to speak to. I'm going to speak about the problems, which there are a lot of, and try and give you some of the solutions. Okay, so the smart specialisation strategy, as I said, all regions had to have them, and in the JRC we read all of them. We looked at all of them, and there is a weak policy mix. All the strategies, as well as identifying priorities, also have to identify how they're going to do it, how they're going to implement this, what we call a policy mix. Very weak on the policy mix in general, and particularly on human capital. And they all like to say which universities they have in their region, especially when they present their strategies at some of the events we have. But when they actually say, well, how are you going to use them concretely, quite weak. And yet, survey data, and we've got a few surveys from Fraunhofer, we did one. Also, there's a public consultation on smart specialisation this year, actually show that what people who are involved with smart specialisation say, what we need most before research, before, actually SMEs, the big issue, and it's also what business say, we want skilled personnel. We want human resources, talent. That's what we need in order to implement our strategies. And yet, they're very weak in the strategies, and we've got a very weak EU framework for delivering that, which I'll come and demonstrate to you now. And even DG Research, who usually, obviously, as you imagine, defends research, reviewed all the strategies and said that these prioritised technological domains will be unsustainable without their adequate human resources to implement them. And there is a big risk that the structural funds, given the emphasis on innovation, will be used. DG Regio policy are very suspicious of universities. They think that they've just got all that, they've got their mouths in the trough, they all want the money. They say they're doing innovation, but in fact they're doing research, which is not the same thing. So there is a risk, unless we really look at what the universities are for, how they do this, that we'll just waste the EU funds on universities. As some of these survey data that I mentioned, it's also in order, and it's conference on Southern Europe, to make a difference between the different parts of Europe. If you see there, this is the reported importance of different policy areas. I said before that they said that research wasn't important in innovation firms. Clearly, it did show that is the case. It was the public consultation, actually, from DG Regio that I can't really present now because it's not been published yet. I was hoping it was going to be published on Wednesday at the Commission meeting, but it wasn't. And then I could have given you the data, but I'm not allowed to because it wasn't published. But in that survey, it actually, the S3 managers, the people who are involved say that it's education skills, which is the most important. Here they say research and science, innovation firms, but the reason why I put this slide in is because there is a difference between Southern Europe and less developed, more developed. So education is clearly more important for less developed regions and Southern European regions than it is for Northern, more developed regions. Okay. But again, the problem we have is universities become rent seekers in the regions in Southern Europe, as you can see that. In Northwest Europe, only 15% said strongly that universities protect their own interests. Southern Europe, Central Eastern Europe, much higher figure. So it's a problem we've got to get beyond. And this was, by the way, a survey that we did in the S3 platform with colleagues from Cardiff University. It's got more data there as well about less developed research and innovation systems, smart specialisation. Okay, so I'll skip this slide, actually. I think we did have partly because it's outdated. I think John Goddard and Louise Kempton and Newcastle University did this with us 4 years ago. And actually, it doesn't really, this is sort of like a framework of how universities can contribute to smart specialisation. It hasn't got enough here about higher education, actually. It's actually quite research-based as well. But as you can see, the roles are quite different. It's not just about generation of knowledge, it's about absorbing knowledge. And universities, and we were discussing this with colleagues about Portugal, where there's a weak subnational level, universities can take a leadership role in smart specialisation if they have the will and desire to do so. This is actually a bit better because it's more to do with what has changed, because we have a lot of literature, there's a lot of studies and work on the role of universities in regional development. This has been being studied for a long time. But people say, well, what's different about smart specialisation? Why? So, we have what's different is a prioritisation around a limited number of economic activities. What's the impact on higher education? Evolution of curricula and research portfolios to the emerging priorities in that region. And a redefinition of third mission. The EDP I mentioned yesterday, talking to winemakers in Dow. Greater focus on applied research, rather than, because it's about entrepreneurs, it's not about basic research. Horizontal skills among graduates is important for entrepreneurship education. Innovation for all regions, it's a place-based approach. I would say a greater role of university and regional governance is an implication. And different models of higher education engagement. I mean, we got different concepts for the role of universities. I hear about the entrepreneurial university, the engaged university, the civic university. I don't know, the list goes on and on. But I think, obviously, it's academics playing around with some ideas about they want to have a new idea. I mean, John Goddard on civic university is the most recent. And I think, that's quite interesting because in some regions, there may be need for more of an emphasis on the social innovation, on the civic engagement, especially at the city level. Whereas entrepreneurial universities sounds to me a bit too much like a neoliberal model that was criticised before by Professor Amaral. So, and a broader understanding of innovation, responding to challenges in the region. So it's also linked in with Horizon 2020, which is based on societal challenges. And a focus on monitoring. I think universities can, especially the social sciences, usually in regional development, people talk about, obviously it's medical schools and engineers, but I think the social sciences can really get involved in this because of the need to monitor the strategies. Right, now the funding, as I said, I promised, and then a concluding words on the project that we're doing. So, as you know, there's three main funds for the structural funds, the ERDF, the ESF, and the Cohesion Fund. Now, herein lies the root of the problem. smart specialisation is dependent on the ERDF only. If you want to spend ERDF on innovation, then you must have a strategy, and therefore everyone is writing their strategies aligned with the ERDF. The ERDF doesn't invest in people, the ESF does. The ERDF will build you a university laboratory, but it won't give you any scientists to work in it. So if we want smart specialisation to be successful, we need all the funds aligned with smart specialisation. And they're not. You can ask me why. I can't give you an answer. Hopefully in the next programming period, that will change. Okay, there's more than 500 billion, as we know, but not much of that is very useful for what we're trying to do in terms of higher education and smart specialisation. So out of that 500 plus billion, and with national contributions, it's more like 700 billion, we've only got 23 billion on thematic objective 10, which is on education. And out of that, only about 4 billion, so 20% of it is on higher education. So that's 4 billion out of 700. There is actually an unknown secondary objective in the, so, excuse me, ESF, you have thematic objective 10, there's 11 thematic objectives in the structural funds. Thematic objective 10 is ESF only. There's not much of the fund. And so is this very unknown secondary objective on research innovation. This is the most interesting one, actually, more than thematic objective 10 is, but again, it's 1.6 billion. It's pocket money in EU cohesion policy terms. But these would be the areas which we have to implement this agenda. So I'm talking about higher education, not research, because there's plenty of money for applied research in thematic objective 1 to do with smart specialisation. And these are the countries who have programmed out of that thematic objective 10. These are the countries that have programmed most. I mean, I've just put this in to show that Southern Europe has, I would say, put an emphasis on education in the structural funds. Portugal, remarkably, being the highest spender on education in the structural funds in the current period. But the second one, which is, I think this is the most interesting, because this secondary objective is 1.8 billion. 80% of it has been chosen by 4 countries. If you could argue if there's one area of the structural funds that could help universities implement smart specialisation in terms of human capital, it's this, and 80% of it is in 4 countries. Interesting again, though, Portugal being one of those, Spain as well. But Germany, Germany being the model, after all, that we just discussed, has a lot of money here. Now, the other question is it aligned with smart specialisation? Because it doesn't have to be. The ESF, they're not obliged to do so. And in fact, I've got no colleagues in DG employment here, so I can say it. Probably we're actively encouraged not to. Member states are actively encouraged not to align the ESF with smart specialisation. They're coming back to the fold now, and hopefully we're going to have a better approach next programming period. So, will it help? But in fact, in some countries, Portugal, being quite clever, not only can you win the European Cup and the Eurovision Song Contest, you can also be a leader in this. And actually, if you analyse the funds, you've got a number of calls for proposals in the regional OPs where projects have to be aligned with smart specialisations criteria. If they're not aligned with smart specialisation, I think about 20%, 25% of the criteria, then you won't get funded. Some of these are examples there. There's also a national OP in the human capital OP, which is to do with the doctorates and postdocs, which again have to be aligned with smart specialisation priorities. So let's see where this works. But Portugal's one of the countries, and we're interested to look more there. So this is last slide about funding. It's not just about, as I said, the university's role is not just about teaching and learning, what I've just said. I think it's the neglected area of the role of universities in innovation, but it's not the only area. We've got a whole funding system at EU level where you have the structural funds, and then you have centrally managed programs like Horizon 2020, Erasmus+, COSME, Marie Curie, all this, the Commission wants countries to try and use these funds in synergy. Okay, so you may have a Horizon 2020 project on the bioeconomy, and you'll also use some ESSI funds to develop that in the market, or some education as well. It can actually be all part of the same project now. You can actually spend, very difficult in practice though. But anyway, this is the funding landscape. Okay, so this is my conclusion. Conclusion is that when I say we, the Commission decided that they would like to look more at what is the role of higher education in smart specialisation. They set up a project in the S3 platform in Seville, where we're based, last March, and we're just coming to the end of the first year. It's linked with other activities that we do, other activities of DG EAC, the knowledge innovation communities who do a lot of work on education and innovation of the European Institute of Technology. But as I said, although it comes from DG Education, we make this clear with them, we're not only looking at education, we're looking at research, we're looking at engagement, the role of universities, higher education institutions in smart specialisation. I said, there's a lot, it could be a massive task, and it's actually quite a small project. So we've focused the objectives to how to integrate higher education into the policy mixes of the strategies. Yeah? To promote the synergetic use of the structural funds and other public funds to incentivise the higher education institutions, and to strengthen the position of those institutions in the S3 governance structures. What is nice to do, but it's not our priority, is to promote cooperation between the universities and other actors in the innovation system, to champion reform within universities to make them more entrepreneurial, to change regulations to allow universities to take better role, all that stuff, which is important, is in the background, but it's not our core objective. Our main objective is to do with the funding and the regions, how they program their money. And how we're doing this, this is just a menu of methods we're doing, apart from some of the traditional analysis and interviews, mapping of the governance system. The interesting part is some of this action research, we call it, where not only do we want to find out what's happening in the regions, how money is actually being spent, how universities are being involved in the strategies, we also want to try and change something. So we want to try and bring people together and create. So we've got things like peer reviews, leadership workshops, project development labs. So quite intense work. So we only had 2 pilots so far, Nevada and Northeast Romania. This year we're going to go to do 3 more in Puglia, Centre-Val-de-Loire, and possibly a region to be determined in Central Eastern Europe, just to prove that I've been to these places. That's me there in Northeast Romania. Very far, long missions, lot of time on the plane. But we're doing this for Europe, so it's important. And after this current round, we're going to have a 3rd round, and there's actually going to be more money in this project, and there's going to be more regions covered in future years. And I want to, now that I've found that information on the funding, looking at those 4 big countries that spend that secondary objective, namely Germany, Portugal, Spain, Czech Republic. Well, that's actually why I put Czech Republic there, but Portugal especially. We want to come to Portugal in the near future. So watch this space. Don't know which region yet. How am I doing for time? I don't know who's the moderator, but I'm almost, these are some of the conclusions from our first pilot stage of action research. There was a lot of work to do. There really isn't any structural relationship, even in Nevada, which is an advanced region, between universities, with the Regional Development Agency around smart specialisation. What's quite interesting is the power asymmetries, I would say, between universities and regions. Because you've got a place like Northeast Romania, which is, if you thought Portugal was bad, I don't know, who's Catalina, who was complaining about some national competences in Portugal. If you thought Portugal was bad, Romania is another planet. Nothing gets done without Bucharest's approval. And so in that region, they've actually got one of the best, if not the first or second best university in the country, but a very, very, very weak region. So the university is in the driving seat, whereas in Nevada, one of the highest competences at subnational level for higher education you'll find. So these power asymmetries are not good. They don't help. The best is if it's middle. And we've got an example in Värmland in Sweden where they work very close together. There's been a very strong, this is not one of our case studies, but we know this from previous work, very strong partnership between the region and the university. And they say that based on that partnership, their success rate in Horizon 2020 has gone up by 70%. And they say it's based on addressing the societal challenges of the region. So we're looking for a more equal level partnership between regions and universities. But as I said, some of these win-win solutions can be found, and that's where the transnational learning has been good. Where, for example, regions saying to researchers, researchers say we want to do research, we want to publish papers, and the regions say we don't care about your papers, we want some change in the region. Well, we had this example where the region actually said, why don't you come and do your research based on the data that we've got on traffic, and so they did that, they got a paper out of it, and they helped the region. So we're looking at some of the win-win solutions rather than trying to change big regulatory frameworks in countries. Okay? The issue of specialised curricula, and Professor Amaral talked about that a bit before, versus sort of general competencies, depends on your capitalist system, but we find that in more developed regions, actually specialised curricula is not as important as general skills. This is what we're coming out of the stakeholders, whereas perhaps in some less developed regions, they need more technical competencies. And there's no single model. I talked there before about the civic university, entrepreneur university. It depends on the context. And these links, this link between higher education and VET seems to be quite critical in all types of region. We want to work more with that, the vocational and education training. Some words of caution, the higher education system and the regional development, two different different groups of people, and they just don't understand each other's language. And this is what John Goddard often says to me, like ships passing each other in the night. And we've seen that a lot, usually these structural funds, for example, will be managed in different ministries. You have the ESF and the education funds, one, and the regional development fund somewhere else, and to try and bring this together is very difficult. So regions are less interested than universities. Whenever we have events, universities pile in. They think there's money involved. They think you get some money out of it. Whereas regions are they really don't understand their university and don't know how to deal with them. That's what we found as well. And also competition within the higher education system. That can be terrible in a region when you've got competition. In Nevada, they've got a big public university and also one of the most successful private universities in the world. And sort of competing with each other on specific areas of research and courses in the same region. This is very debilitating for regional development. You just try and get the universities together, if there are more than one university in the region. Okay, and there's a big resistance among staff. University academics don't actually like this. A lot of it, they think we just want to write papers and leave us alone. But I'm afraid things are changing. And taxpayers are starting to get nervous about what universities are delivering. Right, this is concluding slide. So this project that we're doing, it's not just me saying that it's going to be important. I think it is. It's going to be very important. There's 2 communications being published by the Commission. Should have been on Wednesday, but it's going to be next month. One from DG Regio on the future of smart specialisation. One from DG Education on a reformed agenda for higher education. Both of them are very big on the role of higher education in regional development. And even mention the HES project that we're going to build and strengthen this line of work in the Commission. And we're trying to build a community of practice. You can join in. We're looking for more external partners. And as I said, we're going to increase and have more regions in our action research. Database of good practice. If anyone has any good examples, send them to us. And I think that was my last slide. So thank you very much, and if you have any questions, I'll be delighted to answer now or later in the lunch.
We have now time for a couple of questions.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation and for this new way of dealing with the challenge of incorporating the need for technology and innovation within regional strategies. I would like to ask, I come from Greece actually and have the experience of the region of Central Macedonia, which is quite a developed region in terms of education at least, not in terms of GDP, because a decline has been observed in the last years in terms of GDP per capita. Do you have any information until now about the way this strategy has been implemented? Because as far as I know, there have been some difficulties, not to say problems, but difficulties in the way local community and regional authorities, regional players and so on, understand this way of making this planning and how they do adjust in these new ideas. This is my question. Thank you.
In general or in your Greek region? Yes. What was your question? Was your question about in general?
Yes, in general, of course, but
yeah.
my experience comes from this, my country and my region, which is very important for the country as a whole.
Thessaloniki.
So, Thessaloniki, exactly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, I can't say much about that particular region. The JRC did a pilot case study that was paid for by the European Parliament, not case study, a big 2-year project that is now actually the basis of a much larger project on lagging regions involving Centro, Portugal, for example, Puglia, Extremadura. And it started in Greece, in Eastern Macedonia and Thrace. And they got a lot of support from the JRC for their strategy. I know a little bit about that region, but I know very little about Thessaloniki region, so I wouldn't like to comment even about Greece in general. But the question about how stakeholders are adapting, I would say it's a long process. The communication is very important because if you start talking about smart specialization strategies, entering a process of discovery, all this, I mean, stakeholders are just like, well, you know. So communicating actually what it means is quite important. But there is a big problem, of course, which in southern European countries especially, which is a lot of the regions dependent on European funds, really dependent. A lot of people's jobs are dependent on them. And so if you start saying, we're going to make choices, we're not going to give the money to everyone anymore, café para todos, we're actually going to start saying, sorry, it's not in the strategy, it's not going to be funded. It's quite politically difficult, you know? And this is where I think really the presentation this morning from Catalina about the power and the subnational democracy, and it's quite important because some of these decisions being taken are, you know, in Portugal by the CCDRs that are unelected, can be quite, you know, I'd say difficult from a democratic perspective. So I think, you know, they're the two issues: communication and legitimacy in making some of these difficult choices. Yeah, that's what local stakeholders find it difficult to follow.
Thank you for your words.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Pardon? Yeah, yes, it's true.